Okay, so if we look historically over the development of magic, right, we can see a lot of ways in which magic has kind of blended into forms of mysticism, spiritualism, and so on. And one of the things that people have used playing cards for in the past is to try to test out kind of extrasensory abilities. So if I'm looking at a card, right, I might ask you, which card is that? Okay, and we could kind of test out our abilities, okay, to read each other's minds or whatever it is in that sort of situation. Okay. Now, starting in the kind of early 20th century, there were a group of scientists that got together and thought about taking playing cards to a kind of next level. Okay. And one of those was Professor Zener and his colleague, Dr. Ryan. And they developed what became known as the Zener cards. And these cards were used to test extrasensory perception, you know, people's abilities that would go beyond the kind of normal senses. Okay. So I happen to have some Zener cards here. So I'm going to ask you to take a look at these. So you may be familiar with some of these. There's the famous wavy lines. Okay, so that's there. There is square. Okay. There's the circle. Yeah. And the plus here. And last but not least, the star. Okay. Have you seen these cards before?
I want to say yes, but probably not in the way you're thinking of, because I don't know if you guys remember Uno, playing Uno when you were a kid, but it really reminds me of the Uno cards.
Which cards are those?
Uno?
Uno cards.
Yeah, but I don't think that's the answer you were after, but
reminds me of the film Ghostbusters. Okay, so if I mix up these cards in different ways, right? Okay, so do you feel you know which card is in which envelope? Was anyone following that closely enough?
I don't have ESP.
No. Well, let's test that out. Okay, Jeff, why don't you give me a number 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5?
4.
4. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'll go 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay. So this is your card, right? So you could have taken the plus sign, but you didn't. You could have taken the wavy lines, but you didn't opt for those. You could have taken the square, or you could have taken the circle, okay? But you didn't take any of those. You took the one in here, which is the star. Okay. And I said this was going to be a test of kind of extrasensory perception, but what I didn't say is whose. Okay. So if we have a look at this card, the star, it says something on the back. Can you read what it says?
I thought you would pick the star.
So there you go. ESP in operation. Ta-da.
I feel like there might be a brazenness to this particular trick.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Well, you said you were an honest magician, right?
Yes, that's right.
And
I think I said I was an honest liar previously.
Yeah, an honest liar. And you said that I'd be very curious if you have a lawyerly wording of how you actually describe the trick here. Because what I thought I heard you say was that you had picked the card before, do you remember your exact wording? What is your claim here? What is the trick here again? Could you say that?
I knew you would pick the star, right?
You knew I would pick the star. but of course you didn't know I would pick the star. I think that what you knew is I would pick envelope number 4. And you knew that once you took out the card from envelope 4, that you could very easily put a note on whatever card came out, and thereby sort of after the fact, sort of grant yourself ESP for whatever it was that I had picked, and the rest of it is kind of irrelevant to the actual trick part of it.
Or just have the same thing written on each of the other cards and you would pick the
Yeah,
star.
actually, that's a good question. And Abby's, would you like to turn over the other ones for us?
Well, I feel that you're not respecting my levels of professional standards here, but if we have to do this, then we have to do it. So what does this one say?
I predicted you would pick the star.
But we don't have to stop there, Jeff. What about this one?
I predicted you would pick the star.
Okay.
Okay.
And we've got 2 more. What do we got?
I predicted you would pick the star. I predicted you would pick the star. Okay. So now let me revise my earlier statement, because wait a minute. How do I actually know that envelope 4 was the star? I picked envelope 4. I never picked the star.
No, but I knew you would.
I guess I can't deny that at this point.
So why did I want to do this? I wanted to do this trick to talk a little bit about the role of challenge in magic. Okay? So it's interesting, right, to think about how challenge functions within a magic performance like ours. So in many ways, challenge is kind of semi-legitimate, right? It's a bit like stand-up comedy, where the audience, wants to have a little bit of banter with the comedian, to see, what they're like, and it can be part of the kind of fun jostle of what's taking place. And maybe some other walks of life, like politics and so on, this happens. And the question then of what counts as too much challenge, right? And how do we know that is an interesting one. What I find interesting in having done a lot of magic is how the sense of what constitutes legitimate challenge is something that emerges over the course of the interactions. So I've had some magic performances where basically, the audience has decided that, okay, I'm just watching a show, let's see what you've got, and they just let me kind of get on with it. In other situations, people are much more kind of proactive. They want to get stuck in. They do it early on, right? And it kind of escalates from there. So I can remember one very kind of memorable performance where I was shuffling the cards and someone basically took them from me, shuffled them himself. He gave them back to me and he said, "Finish the trick now." Okay. Yeah. So it's interesting, right? And then when I ask people about, okay, well, how they're responding to me, oftentimes people cite a kind of norm about how we should behave in magic. But if you think about it, right, there's no etiquette book. There's no place you go to read about, like, how does one behave in magic? And when I would ask people about these norms and what they entailed, almost invariably the norms would be kind of justifying exactly what that person had done. Okay. And it would almost be like there's this norm kind of floating above us, and it kind of tells us what to do. And it just happens in every situation. It reaffirms what that individual is doing. So I found it really interesting, the way in which challenge emerges in magic, and the way in which people account for their actions, not as something that kind of happens between us that we produce together, but almost this kind of rule that floats above us and tells us what to do. So this trick is very interesting, right? Because if I had just done it and you hadn't challenged me, it wouldn't have gone very well. But thankfully, you challenged me, and we get to see a kind of another dimension of what's taking place. But I wonder then how you think about the role of challenge, about whether to challenge, when to challenge, what's coming up for you in the interactions we've had and the points I just made?
Well, the thing is I'm wondering, because I think that it can go either way. This actually feels a lot like lecturing in general, right? Is that sometimes when people are very passive, that can almost throw you off your game more than when they're hostile, right? And so sometimes I actually strangely prefer a hostile audience to a passive audience, because it's actually more easy to know how to do that. Maybe that's too much insight into my own pathos, actually, but let's go with it.
Okay, yeah. So how have you been thinking about challenge in your interactions here, Jeff? Are you thinking, I like a challenge, so maybe Brian likes a challenge too, so let's go for it? Or is there a sense of wanting to hold back a little bit? Or?
This brings us back to the theme of theory of mind in magic performances, and particularly how we project our own theory of mind onto others, or how magic presupposes sort of shared frames of reference in those domains. And I think in this particular case, it's partly a matter of sort of experimenting, seeing if you sort of react better when I sort of play along, or sort of when I'm sort of needle you more, how you react to that, and then sort of going from there. So sort of letting you as this sort of the director of this social interaction, or give me the cues about sort of how I'm supposed to be performing as a party to this.
Yeah. Abby, Paul, what's coming up for you in terms of challenge and the way you're thinking about what you're doing here?
I think that I'm circling back to what I said earlier about that that awareness that you are sort of in on the act, and you're the gag, or you're the dupe in all of this. So I was thinking about how that trick was working, and how that could have played out differently if Jeff hadn't challenged you. So straight away, I'm thinking about, is Jeff a participant in this? Is he in on the act? And I'm also thinking about, sorry, I'm not making myself very clear, but I think that fear and stress is coming through a lot of this as well. Expertise, skill. As a spectator, you're almost afraid, or I'm almost afraid to challenge, because so much of this is sitting on a level above me. So it's inhibiting me. Sorry, I didn't make a lot of sense there, but
yeah, no, great.
Yeah, because I agree with that, because it's almost like by watching the magic trick, you kind of do suspend, to some extent, you kind of suspend your challenging thoughts, because you almost want to be fooled, or you almost don't want to find out how it was done, or you don't want to know that. You kind of almost think, okay, well, I mean, actually, this isn't true for me, because I couldn't challenge Brian because I don't know how he does it. But I think even if I did know, I'd probably think, okay, well, I don't want to challenge and reveal that, because that's not the role. I guess also that's not the role that I'm meant to be playing, maybe. So I guess some of that is interactional. But also, secondly, I just wonder, just talking about norms and stuff, how much of this is culturally specific as well. So, it would just be interesting, wouldn't it, if you've got kind of a very kind of English audience versus a very kind of American audience, or how that kind of then affects how willing people are to challenge, and how they kind of perceive of their role, and kind of what they're comfortable to say as well.
Yeah.